check this out. You see this? Look at it. It's GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64, running at a smooth 60 frames per second. And this was all done thanks to the collaboration of fans. They had no budget, they didn't get paid for this. They went ahead and made an emulator that forces Perfect Dark and GoldenEye to run at 60 frames per second, with keyboard and mouse support, controller support, and pretty effective optimization. It's impressive. It's the 1964 emulator. Now check this out. This is the most recent release of GoldenEye 007, the highly anticipated Xbox and Switch releases. They don't look so hot. Got lower quality textures, mixed up music, 30 frame per second cap, and slowdowns to top all that off. Not to mention the Xbox doesn't have online play. The Switch does, but it just doesn't have as good controls. It's kind of a mess. And the weird thing is that people seem to be okay with that, or at least a vocal minority are. You go around on Twitter or YouTube or other social media sites, people are liking this kind of sloppy remaster, re-release of the game, to the point some people are just legitimately irate that people don't like it. It's weird. I mean, if you read some of these comments, people go on the attack if you point out any issues in the remaster, re-release, whatever you want to call it, despite the fact that it's pretty prominent and the fan fixes are available for free, whereas you have to pay for this console port. Now, look at this. This is even better. This is a full-blown HD remake of the game that was set to release in the late 2000s, made by Rare, the guys who made the game in the first place. This was the Xbox Live Arcade port that was set to come out around 2008-2007. It was almost done. It even had bonus features, some more maps that weren't featured in the original game, online play, new options, updated graphics. It looked incredible. The only way we got it was through a leak because it got cancelled. No, it seems like it was cancelled at the very, very last minute, too. Apparently it might have been only a few bug fixes away from release, and there might be a version of it at Rare that was even closer to being done. And it runs stably. You can get the game going from start to finish without crashes or anything else. There's even a mouse plugin for the Xenia emulator if you want to do it with native keyboard and mouse support. So here's my question. Why is this nearly 15-year-old remake better than the current release today? Why are these fan efforts to make GoldenEye accessible better than something funded by major studios, something that had to come from an agreement between Nintendo, Microsoft, and MGM? Why did that not turn out very well? And the answer seems like it's complicated. In order for GoldenEye to get a re-release, there has to be an agreement among all of the property holders. Microsoft owns Rare, Nintendo owns the original license to GoldenEye, and MGM owns the rights to James Bond, including any game releases or stuff of that sort. So it's difficult to get them to agree on stuff, especially MGM. You'd think Nintendo would cause more problems, and maybe they did initially, but MGM seems very, very stingy on how they handle the rights to the games. How stingy? I mean, not just taking down fan remakes of the game like GoldenEye 25. I mean pressuring Ubisoft to delete community levels for Far Cry 5 that remade the GoldenEye levels. Stuff in a level editor for an entirely different game, all because it was based off GoldenEye and had the level names as references. That's how obsessed they are with keeping this license to themselves. I don't know why. I mean, GoldenEye is practically a license to print money. You can slap it onto a totally unrelated game, like the 2010 GoldenEye, which was basically just a Modern Warfare spin-off, or GoldenEye Rogue Agent, which was kind of just its own thing. Unrelated spy thriller game where you literally have a golden eye, but that has name recognition. People are like, oh yeah, that was that really cool multiplayer game with James Bond and paintball mode and slapping people in Odd Job being a cheat. It's just, it prints money. So why they aren't more lenient with these rights to it is beyond me. Code Mystics handled the GoldenEye port, the new one that came out, and it seems like they were under some pretty strict regulations. It seems like they might not be able to get a patch out, even. I guess they gotta cut through a lot of red tape to get to that point, and it seems like they were working within restrictions, some of which they can't even talk about. It's the choice to stick to 30 frames per second they argued in favor of, and I get their logic. 60 frames per second on the original N64 release means that oftentimes you'll outpace the guards, and you can just run rings around them and gun them down effortlessly. That's fair. But the game should never go below 30 frames. It's 25, 26 years old now? There's no excuse for that, especially on one of the most powerful systems on the market, the Xbox Series X. You get that, and you can't even run GoldenEye at 30 frames. There are slowdowns when there's a lot of activity going on. I mean, that's crazy. It's an N64 game. The game probably runs better on the N64 anyway. Definitely runs better on the 1964 emulator, and the Xbox Live Arcade remake runs better. And even then, fans have found ways to get around that issue. On some custom levels, there are special guard behaviors to let them compensate for the added frames per second, so they can continue to hit you even when you're moving faster than their normal reaction times. And the Xbox Live Arcade port doesn't have this issue at all, because they're meant to be played at 60 frames per second, so they can keep up with you. Which I guess gets back to my main point. Why didn't they just finish up the Xbox Live Arcade port? It was almost done. Just needed a few more bug fixes to be released. It had everything people wanted. People were salivating for this for years, and there was so much hype when it finally leaked. It's almost done, and that was what people kind of thought was going to come out. As for why it didn't, your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's just a minimal effort thing. Maybe MGM doesn't want to acknowledge it exists, and they'd rather just get out the existing product, because I know people won't care if it's a shoddy port. They'll pay for it. I mean, I've been swindled that way. I pre-ordered the 13 remake, and that turned out to be garbage. Even after multiple patches and an art style shift, it's still not that good. Seems like companies just think they can get away with doing bad remakes and remasters because they know people will eat them up. And I think the problem is it also just shifts people's perceptions of the games. Seems like people now are acting like GoldenEye was always this bad game, this artifact from a long-gone era with crappy controls and bad music quality. And the controls were an acquired taste, but they weren't bad. You got used to them pretty quickly after playing, and it ran pretty well. It wasn't terrible. Some N64 games are just slow as could be, like Perfect Dark. I don't know why people are so aggressive about this new release. It's cool that we get online play on the Switch, even if it's forced split screen, which is just weird. You'd think they could put in a little bit of effort to make it so that you have your own screen when playing online. I mean, if it was just Switch elitism, I'd get it, because I've heard about those sorts of issues before, but it's not. It seems like people are really defending the Xbox version, too. They take offense if you point out these issues. They'll go to bat for it. When it's like these MGM doesn't care about what you think, they just care about making money. And that's probably why they did so little, or wanted so little to be done before its release. I don't blame Code Mystics for the way it turned out. Seems like they had the bare minimum to work with, in the sense of, like, okay, just make sure the game runs on an emulator without crashing and release it on these platforms. Because that's what this is. It's not a new game, it's not the Xbox Live Arcade version, which ran on its own source code. This is just a glorified N64 emulator running GoldenEye. That's all there is to it. I mean, Banjo-Kazooie got improvements when it came out through Rare Replay and Xbox Live Arcade. I don't get why this didn't. But it's just a shame. The complacency is what bothers me most of all. People are just willing to accept inferior products, as long as it's got that nostalgia factor. They'll play it for a day or two, and they'll be like, oh, it didn't age very well, and then they'll just move on. And that's just a disservice. GoldenEye has aged pretty well. It's a unique sort of game. It's not perfect. There are definitely some areas that could have been improved. And even the Xbox Live Arcade version needed some tweaks. It needed a brightness slider. There needed to be some adjustments with the way the Egypt level was designed, but it wasn't a bad game. And I think that both the original game and the Xbox Live Arcade remake were really good. I still play them to this day. So, what am I getting at with all this? I guess that you shouldn't feel obligated to defend a company just because it's done good stuff before. MGM hit a good stride with some James Bond games like Nightfire and GoldenEye. They were cool, and I'm glad they signed off on them, but that was a long time ago, and they really haven't been up to snuff lately. The Switch and the Xbox Series X are good consoles, but they should be able to run an N64 emulator that's running GoldenEye. They should be able to do that with minimal effort. It's ridiculous that you should accept an inferior product, where the game barely runs, the text is all low quality, the music has issues, and you're probably never going to get a patch for it anyway. I'm not anti-corpo, I'm not against big companies. They can do good and bad in equal measure. I just think people should maybe accept that they can make missteps. And just because you were hyped for something doesn't mean you're obligated to defend it. I've been let down before as well. BioShock Infinite let me down, the 13 remake let me down, Black Mesa Zen let me down. Even though I was hyped for them, I didn't go out of my way to defend them, I just accepted they were what they were and moved on. And that didn't make their predecessors any worse. I enjoyed the original BioShock. I really like the original 13, and Black Mesa itself is still a fantastic game. So in closing, I guess what I'm getting at is brand loyalty is bad. Don't do it. And be willing to look at things critically. There's nothing wrong with enjoying something, even if it's not good. Even if people say something's bad. I love Kane and Lynch 2. Even though people say it's an awful game. People say it's one of the worst games ever made, but I've had a blast with it. People say Hunt Down the Freeman's garbage, and I love it. But I guess there's nothing wrong with pointing out issues with them either. Kane and Lynch 2 could have been a lot better. I still like it, but I'm willing to admit there are areas it messes up at. And there are areas where there's a lot of missed potential. So with all that in mind, I guess my question is this. What's driving people to get so vicious about defending this re-release of GoldenEye? What makes it so special? Why are people out for blood when you say the slightest bad thing about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening to this ramble and watching the gameplay. I appreciate you guys and your feedback. And I'm always happy to make these kinds of videos. So, thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.